Friendly greetings. It's Torley here, and I hope you'll be pleased to know that Dream Journal 2 is not too far away. Lots of really beautiful music within there that, of course, is derived from when I'm asleep, when I'm daydreaming, all the sorts of dreams that I have. The whole universe that I've created is going to be expanded in a tremendous and delightful way. I've been thinking lately, I've heavily been inspired over the years by the work of Sid Mead, who influenced, among other things, Tron, Blade Runner, and he's so good at making his futuristic visions. I think the saying that he once said is something like, science fiction is just reality ahead of schedule. Something like that. I might be misquoting or horribly, egregiously paraphrasing that, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. And as how he explores the visual arts to come up with often vehicle designs, but not just the vehicles, but the cityscapes around them, I think about how that works with music. When I create a piece, I think, could this be in one of my dreams, the nightclub that I saw, or the sushi bar, or the metro? And there's a disconnect that I slip into to escape from the cultural trappings of what we know here as reality. Certain things that we do because we're trained to as model citizens every day, and to think about how things might be different and the reasons for culture shock. Someone from another country has been trained daily to behave quite differently, especially things like hand signals. It's so odd how a syllable, one word, can make someone so mad if they've been trained that it's a dirty word, and that one barking of a word will have such an effect on their nervous system. Words can be incredibly destructive that way, and they can be incredibly constructive as well when you encourage someone and they go forth to create and do awesome things. So Sid Mead, I believe one of his titles, and I wonder how he came up with this, is visual futurist, and that's beautiful. That's really beautiful to me. So I started to think for myself, sonic futurist, sonic world builder. That's another term when you have writers like Joss Whedon and Ridley Scott, who collaborated with Sid Mead on Blade Runner, creating this whole world within a movie. And when it's over, you want the story to continue. You want add-on merchandise, hopefully, that doesn't mar your vision. And speaking of Veronica Mars, that has a great world built into it, to more of a realistic one with Neptune, California by Rob Thomas and crew. But nonetheless, really, really fascinating stuff. And I loved watching that show recently. Loved watching all the way to season 3 and the end. I felt season 3 got weaker, but the magic still, the threads and the characterization, and of course the set lighting, which inspired me to play with this. Oh yeah, my Living Colors is off screen. Let's go with the green alien ship here. So in addition to sharing these thoughts with you of what's going on, I like to have them for my own record, so I know what I was thinking at a given point in time. It's something I very much recommend. And within my sonic world building, for lack of a better term, or aural, but the problem with the word aural, you have aural, R-A-L, A-U-R-A-L versus O-R-A-L, it's homonym there. Can be confused, but some way of oral history, I need a catchier term. I was thinking about sorts of races that would inhabit different planets, perhaps, even different timelines, alternate universes, parallel realities are of prime interest to me. I try to put in bullet points the sorts of enchantments, and sometimes I understand, but I look very, very methodically at how they have come to be from the time I was a little boy, and again conditioned to think like I grew up with a Commodore 64, and it's funny how many others out there have the same sort of nostalgic attachment. It's like a slingshot with an elastic spring that shoots them back and produces that resonance. If you could scan someone's brain who is a geek and becoming an elder geek looking at a Commodore 64. So I was thinking in particular about a race of aliens, but at least human in appearance perhaps. There's always that thing of how can they be relatable to us? So there's different cultures that value different sorts of things. Hard work, morals and ethics, being kind to each other, the golden rule. So this race would be the geddun, or the geddun. I haven't figured it out yet, but Geddun. And they would be a productive race. That would be one of their cultural, their traditional tropes, to talk about acquisition of resources, but to be at the same time not just blind dash for oil and blood diamonds. It would be more of a considerate approach that, well, if so-and-so is not using the resources, we should have them. Not in an evil way, like smirky, snarky, smarmy sort of style, but they would be very much into like what we have today with sites like Lifehacker and all sorts of copycats that have sprung up. People are more interested than ever in accomplishing things and getting a lot done, if you can get my drift there. So their culture would be centered around this. And sometimes with alien races, I often think how certain things seem unplausible. They might not be, because there's machinations behind the scenes, imaginary ones, which they haven't really unfolded. They might in non-canonical books as Star Trek, because I used to wonder, okay, the Klingons, they can't afford even good dental care. How can they have starships and all that? You ever wonder some of these things? And it's fun to think about. But with the geddun, that would be a practical, very practical aspect, because they're centered around productivity. They're focused on getting things done, on accomplishing, and that is the core, it would be the core tenet of their civilization. Like that line from Confucius, I think it says something like, it does not matter how fast or slow that you go, just don't stop. So worthwhile follow-ups to things like that. A problem that I often have nowadays, I used to participate heavily in a variety of internet discussion forums. I don't do that so much nowadays, not the least reason because I have so many other things that I prefer to indulge in over that. They do take a greater priority, but also because there is a lack of gift, follow-up, the skills being shared. It's frustrating. I understand when you ask a question, someone answers and asks you a question back, but you may not have checked the thread. In some cases, there are better tools, of course, to ping you, to alert, to keep the flow going. And unfortunately, a lot of times I see really stunted and immature, premature, like fetuses, aborted ideas that are useless in the frame of the comments. It's slop that needs to be chopped. Like, for example, a blog post that seems to be controversial, and from then on you have a hailstorm of comments, which is rather violent. Failing to read the first point in the first paragraph, it happens a lot. And the most valuable opinions that I often see are ones that are not just well thought out at that moment, but ones that consider an investment in history. Just like it may seem unflashy and not so glamorous to put your money in, invest it in a stable, long-term fund, it's not as sexy as buy, sell on the open market. But it is reliable, and that is why the opinions that I value the most and trust the most, that matter the most to me, that I will readily listen and respond to, have those merits of being in there for the long term, having a certain innate sense of loyalty that is pragmatic, not necessarily just to the ideas itself, but the continuation that one's viewpoint can and does change and does develop. Like, for example, one of my pet peeves is these Mac versus PC or something versus something, these dumb-ass fanboy threads that don't do good for anyone. It just riles up a bunch of anger. I seldom ever see someone says, well, I prefer this, and here's what I've made with it to show you. I know some people are overly shy and overly modest and afraid to toot their own horn, but this is a great time to show, okay, I made this choice, but I can explain to you my intentions of why I made this choice to help you better understand. So even if you are similar or different than me, you can gain better insight and you can grow as a person yourself. And I don't see a lot of that. A lot of people are rushed right now to make opinions. It's like the comment first on YouTube comment says, I may get here. And they don't consider the longer term. And this is one thing I really appreciate with Neil Stephenson's Anathem, to think about the long now, to think about what endures, what will last many years from now, what will continue to be with you, what will you spend your time on that continues to change you. It's the same thing with television shows. I really can't get into something unless I'm compelled by some element that makes me look it all up in TV tropes and think to myself, I could apply that to part of my life. And I don't do it in an overly analytical way either. It sort of spurs naturally. It's born out of passion and freaking enthusiasm. And those are the things that I am attracted to. So long story short, a lot of worthless, useless opinions out there. And it does sound harsh, but the people who make them might not now realize that, but later on they look back and they say, well, that was a dumb thing to get involved in, just a waste of my time, wasted someone else's time, people who got hurt, people who got mad, when I could have been doing something more helping. And that's part of the, again, loops back to the geddun and how they do not have a religion per se, but if there was a closest thing to spirituality, it would be to chop the slop, to amplify the awesome, to reduce these useless clutter bits. So that's the sort of thing wherein I have my real world philosophies and my teachings, and I think about how they might be interpreted or shifted differently. So the views expressed in my fictions are not necessarily those my own. They may be contrary or complementary on a parallel track. It's an intriguing thing though, because I wonder why so many people, they always assume that an author's viewpoint in a book of fiction is the author's own. They don't ask more of a question, and that's a recurring thread with me. Instead of assuming, ask. They may not answer, but at least you haven't come to something that is premature, that you're not going to support, that you're not going to be more robust about. There's so much that comes and goes, drive by, fly by on the internet, flash in the pan, and I don't want that. I enjoy the speed of communication at times, but I like us to have the opportunity to have a carefully considered response if we feel busy at the moment and we feel overloaded and we feel like we are multitasking too much. It's important to let that focus seep in and take a deep breath and respond to something with a higher quality. And you can respond quickly. It's not necessarily a dichotomy of quality versus speed. You can grow your dynamic balance over time, but it is one wherein you feel more comfortable and more assured that what you said is what you really wanted to say, not because you were pressured to be the first commenter. And some of these thoughts right now are unspooled. They will flow, and I will need to distill them into more succinct achievables later. But this is what I'm thinking right now. So another thing, one last thought for now, is the thought of labeling and how lazy. Okay, so you have lazy here, and productivity. Okay, someone who's productive versus lazy. They're often held in such stark contrast that they are antagonized. But really, I see them so often as being the halves of a whole. For if you are productive, if you get a lot of things done more effectively, there is a certain amount of laziness involved with that. Maybe laziness isn't even the right word. We need new words for new things, new methodologies, new processes, new ways of life in this advancing 21st century era. With productivity, often you find shortcuts so that you can relax. And if sipping a pina colada in a hammock out on a gorgeous tropical beach is being lazy, then you have achieved both. You've been productive, you've worked hard so you can play later and be lazy. They are really two halves of that same cosmological world. And with labels, I think of things like techno. For me, it is not a particular substyle from Detroit or Cologne. It is technologically based music. And I'm mindful, very mindful, to think of what one term to us, how it might be different around the world, the real earth as we know it, and furthermore, as an extrapolation an extension of that, how it might be different in those parallel worlds, those alternate realities.